Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, what does the UN General Assembly actually do?
The level of impunity in the world is politically indefensible and morally intolerable.
How a year of unprecedented war and conflict has exposed the underbelly of the United Nations. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
My name is Biesan Abu-Kwaik. I'm the Al Jazeera Arabic UN correspondent here in New York.
Biesan, welcome back to The Take. It's always good to have you. You know that there are 193 member states of the UN General Assembly, which means that some of the world's top decision makers are walking the halls that you are walking in. What is the mood like? Set the scene for me. What are you hearing? What are you feeling?
I think, there's always excitement for this high-level week, as it's called here, where you have all of these world leaders coming to New York. But I would say that the mood is a darker mood because of what we have been seeing happening over the past 11 months with the war on Gaza, the failure of the international community to actually end and stop this war. And it's not just Gaza. What we hear from diplomats, it's Sudan, it's Ukraine, the continuous use of the veto at the Security Council. So this comes at a time where questions are being asked. Is this system that has been built after World War II, is it working? Even the UN Secretary General in his speech to the UN General Assembly spoke about impunity.
Today, a growing number of governments and others feel entitled to get out of jail free card. They can trample international law. They can violate the United Nations Charter.
So even the UN Secretary General is frustrated, and he gave a strong speech speaking about that, and that, this is a time for change. So this system can actually work towards ending conflicts and serve the people.
Wow. Bold words, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But it sounds like the call is coming from within the UN, which hopefully by the end of this conversation, we'll see whether anyone is listening to that call. But you mentioned the war in Gaza, Israel's bombardment of Gaza over these past 11 months. This is the first UNGA since October 7th. And this year, Israel's war and now its attacks on Lebanon have taken center stage. How have you seen that show up? What are people saying?
Definitely. The escalation and the war in Lebanon and what we've seen over the past week has also even overshadowed Gaza, given the concern that we've heard from world leaders in their speeches and in the hallways that this would spill over to a wider war in the region. And there was an emergency Security Council meeting that France had called for just to discuss Lebanon. And in that meeting, speech after speech, we heard people say that they're worried that South Lebanon would be another Gaza. And also, the pager attacks, these also created a big concern for people and world leaders in particular, because this is a new way or form of war.
So can you give us a taste of what some of those speeches have been like? In which people are calling on more attention on Israel's actions and condemning Israel, because we know they're coming from likely players like Turkey, Turkish President Erdogan, but also coming from Latin American leaders. We heard from the Colombian president and Brazil's Lula da Silva. What have those speeches sounded like?
Speech after speech that we have heard, Malika, has touched upon what has been happening in Gaza. And clearly, there's unhappiness. And we've heard it from, as you mentioned, the Turkish President Erdogan.
Just as Hitler was stopped with the Alliance of Humanity, Netanyahu and the Murder Network should also be stopped with the Alliance of Humanity. More than 17,000 children have become the target of Israel's bombs.
We've heard it from the Emir of Qatar, the King of Jordan, and also leaders in Latin America.
In Gaza,
In Gaza and the West Bank, we are witnessing one of the biggest humanitarian crises in recent history, which is now expanding dangerously into Lebanon.
Clearly, there's dissatisfaction by what Israel has been committing in Gaza and this continuous war. And again, this whole theme of the international community not being able to end this and the use of the veto and criticism by some towards the US for actually enabling Israel in this war by providing the weapons. It's a very interesting and different, probably, tone that we've been hearing than maybe from previous years during UNGA.
So, Biesan, you and I are speaking on Thursday morning. Benjamin Netanyahu is scheduled to speak on Friday morning, right around the time this episode comes out. What do we know about that speech?
We don't know what that speech would look like, if he's going to bring in also some props, because he's done that in the past. We've seen actually the maps. So it's going to be interesting to see what he will say, but it will probably be along the lines of what we've been hearing from him and Israeli officials and ambassadors here at the UN, of course, talking about October 7th and the hostages, and probably attacking the UN too, because this is a theme that we've heard from the Israeli ambassador here time and time again, attacking the UN for not doing enough for Israel.
So, Biesan, earlier you mentioned that one of the other people that spoke on this main stage was UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and he had some strong words about the effectiveness of the United Nations. But you also sat down with him for an exclusive interview not too long ago, and specifically he talked about Security Council and how effective it could be. Tell me about that interview. What was his demeanor like, and what did he say that stuck with you?
The interview focused on Gaza predominantly, and it was conducted before what happened in Lebanon. So that was the main theme of the interview.
We have been very clear denouncing the fact that this war has had a level of death and destruction that has no parallel in my time as Secretary General of the United Nations.
I felt that he actually came out stronger in terms of what has been happening in Gaza with what he said in some of his statements, particularly how the UN Charter is being trampled.
الكثير من النقد يوجه لمجلس الأمن الدولي الجمود في المجلس.
And then when I asked about the Security Council, he basically said that the Security Council has failed.
The truth is that the Security Council has systematically failed in relation to the capacity to put an end to the most dramatic conflicts that we face today: Sudan, Gaza, Ukraine.
You know, the UN, a lot of its work is humanitarian work. And in his answer, he was basically saying that when UN officials are on the ground and UN workers are on the ground in Gaza, people look at them and they say, but the Security Council, instead of thinking of the work that the UN provides on the humanitarian side. Of course, we need to also mention that UN workers have been attacked relentlessly in this war. More than 200 aid workers and UN workers have been killed in Gaza. So this also adds another level of pressure on the UN doing and being able to perform its work on the ground.
I can imagine people watching and listening to this hearing that the UN Secretary General, the head of this international body, saying that the Security Council has failed and is not compatible with our world today. They might be thinking, well, what can you do about it? Do something about it because we agree. Does he have the power to do anything about it?
Well, in a press conference, actually, he said, and I'm quoting him, he has no power and no money. And this was also a preview press conference for the UN General Assembly. But he said that what he has is his voice. And this is what he's been focusing on, using his voice to draw attention to all of these issues, to this deadlock at the Security Council and in the international community to end conflicts and relieve the people who have been enduring the suffering and these conflicts.
After the break, what a year of unprecedented war has done to the UN General Assembly. Hi. Before we continue, we really want to know more about you and how you feel about our podcasts. So we have a brief survey for you. Stay tuned to the end of this episode to find out how you can have your say. Biesan, one of the world leaders' statements that I found really interesting going into this year's UNGA came from the Taoiseach of Ireland, Ireland's Prime Minister Simon Harris. He is quoted as saying, "We should be here at the United Nations this week talking about de-escalation. And instead, we're going to be meeting at a UN General Assembly against the backdrop of escalation," which really encapsulates what many people watching the UN are likely thinking. And Harris gave these comments to PBS News' Christiane Amanpour.
I mean, the United Nations was founded to resolve conflicts peacefully and politically. And I do think the world now and world leaders, as we gather here, needs to ask ourselves about the consistent application of the rule of law and of international law. We cannot have a situation where international law must be applied to some but can be disregarded by others.
What do you make of that discrepancy, that we should be talking about de-escalation, but that's not happening?
Probably a lot of the world leaders coming into this week, Malika, were focused more on Gaza and this 11-month war in Gaza and the huge suffering there and the destruction. And maybe finding ways to speak more about it and maybe find a way to end this war or find a way to de-escalate this war. But instead, as you had mentioned in these remarks, now the focus is on a new conflict. Now, the efforts are more towards finding a way to end this escalation in Lebanon, knowing that they, and this is what we've heard, we don't want to turn Lebanon into another Gaza. And if this, escalates further, it'll pull the whole region to the brink. So it is an interesting, feel or atmosphere, knowing that these, instead of like ending one conflict, another one is starting. And this also goes back again to Ukraine and to Sudan. And we've heard from officials and heads of state from both of these countries too. So it's just piling up instead of resolving conflicts that have been ongoing.
Biesan, you're talking about all of these meetings to resolve these conflicts, and some of the Gaza ones are sideline meetings because of the latest news out of Lebanon. But we know that this past week, world leaders did try to take action when it came to passing a resolution calling for Israel to bring an end to its unlawful presence in the occupied territories. Some larger world powers, the United States and India, either voted against or abstained from that vote. What does that say about the state of the UNGA when it comes to Israel?
So with the UNGA, their resolutions are non-binding, but this was a resounding message coming from the world, basically saying that Israel has to abide by the advisory opinion that was issued by the ICJ, and it should end its illegal occupation in Palestinian territories within 12 months. So it's a strong message. The U.S. position was not surprising because this has been their position all along. The U.K., for instance, abstained, which was interesting given the change in government. What's strong is the messaging and what the Palestinian ambassador had said after that vote that this is a historic day for Palestinians. And also, maybe just like one caveat, when this resolution was presented, it was the first time actually presented by Palestine, because a few months ago, the Palestinian mission here in Palestine also threw a vote at the UNGA. They got some extra privileges, not full membership, but some extra privileges at the UN. And this allowed them to actually present that resolution.
Biesan, we have talked about how Lebanon has taken center stage, Lebanon and Israel, perhaps in a way that people didn't see happening before these Israeli attacks on Lebanon took place. But it is not the only conflict. It's not the only war. We have Russia, Ukraine, we have Sudan, just as examples. There are also important issues that people have brought to the main stage. The last time we had a chance to speak with you here on The Take, you were newly assigned to cover the United Nations. What has changed for you when you think about covering these meetings and the importance of the UN and why this work still matters?
Probably when you look at the UN from the outside, and for someone who does not understand how the system works here, they look at the UN, they look at the Security Council in particular, not the UN as the organization, and they feel that nothing is being done. But once you're here, and this is what we hear from diplomats. We do hear frustration from diplomats. We've had one Security Council meeting after the other on Gaza, and even diplomats feel they're frustrated giving the same speech over and over and over again. But also, from a different point of view, some say that it's important to keep on having the conversation and keep on sending the messaging, and maybe something will change at some point in time. But probably, Malika, someone sitting in Gaza with bombs raining on them, they do not have the luxury of just listening to speeches. They want action.
And that's The Take. At Al Jazeera Podcasts, we want to hear from listeners like you. So if you have a few minutes, go to aljazeera.com/survey and tell us about yourself. From things like how you listen to us to what kind of shows you want to listen to or topics you'd like us to cover. Again, that's aljazeera.com/survey. Thanks.